So I'll move on to NM28/20, notice of motion from Councillor Veach, celebrating press freedom and supporting press freedom for Australian journalists. We have speaking Dr. Lisa Johnson. You have 3 minutes. Yep, and you have 3 minutes. Thanks, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. So my name is Lisa Johnson. I'm a clinical psychologist and journalist and founding spokesperson for the group Doctors for Assange, which is a group of 200 doctors and psychologists from around the world working to secure the humane treatment of Julian Assange, including in the Lancet. I'd like to thank Randwick Council for taking the time to consider this important issue. There's a strong case to be made that this is perhaps one of the most significant motions to come before any council on the subject of press freedom and citizens' fundamental democratic and human rights. I'm on the eve of World Press Freedom Day. An Australian journalist and Australian citizen is in prison as part of a historic press freedom test case. So for the first time ever, the US Espionage Act is being applied to publishing activity. And importantly, that publishing activity has attracted one of Australia's most reputable and most esteemed prizes for journalism, the Walkley Award for Most Outstanding Journalism in 2010. So if that prosecution is successful, the precedent that will be set is that journalism will be redefined as espionage. So it's a highly politicised case. It's being denounced by the world's leading press freedom groups, not just for its potential to criminalise journalism, but also for its extraterritoriality. US laws are being applied to a non-US citizen in a foreign jurisdiction, and the protections of the US Constitution, the free speech protections, are being withheld. And even worse, an Australian citizen's fundamental human rights are being grossly violated in the process, including his human rights to health and life and his right to be free from torture. The UN Rapporteur on Torture, Niels Meltzer, has reported that Julian Assange is being psychologically tortured in Belmarsh Prison, on top of a long history of prolonged psychological torture. And the International Bar Association, Human Rights Association has called Julian's treatment in Belmarsh Prison shocking and excessive, and including in Belmarsh Court, and likened it to the Abu Ghraib prison scandal. So now, Julian Assange is at imminent risk of death from coronavirus, which has entered Belmarsh Prison and begun killing prisoners. And he's medically vulnerable to the lethal effects of COVID-19 because of his history of psychological torture and also because of a long history of medical neglect and fragile health, including persistent respiratory issues. Nevertheless, despite hearing medical evidence of Julian Assange's vulnerability to coronavirus, last month an emergency bail application was denied, which goes against internationally agreed guidelines for prisoner release. Julian Assange meets all the criteria for release, and it was against the advice of Amnesty International. And the effect is essentially to leave him for dead in prison over journalism. So the world's leading human rights and organisations and authorities in international law.
Excuse me, Dr. Johnson. Excuse me, Dr. It's the 3 minutes, but I'll grant you an extra minute to finish.
Almost done. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Almost done. Thanks. So they're unequivocally denouncing his treatment and the extradition proceedings themselves, and many are calling for his urgent release. So if human rights are to mean anything, if press freedom is to mean anything, and if Australian citizenship is to mean anything, Australians, including the Randwick Council, really must stand with these leading world authorities in human rights and international law and call for the humane treatment of Julian Assange and, at the very least, his release on bail. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you prepared to take questions from the councillors?
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
Any councillors? Do you have any questions? No.
Yep, sorry, Councillor Hamilton.
Okay, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Ms. Johnson. My question is Do you think that the public perception is that Julian Assange is in jail for mere journalism?
No, I think, well, I think it depends who you speak to, but there's certainly a widespread perception that he's there for other reasons. I don't think it's that his case has been very well reported, so there's widespread misinformation and lack of knowledge. I think there's a perception that WikiLeaks releases caused harm to innocent people by dumping material unredacted, that it might have something to do with that, which isn't the case. The reality is that WikiLeaks undertakes quite a stringent redaction process, and a Brigadier General testified at Chelsea Manning's court-martial that no harm had come to anybody as a result of the releases. Australian Task Force for the Department of Defence said that there was no security threat or harm. And even Joe Biden said they'd done no harm other than be embarrassing. So, and that came out in court at the extradition hearing too. Even the US prosecution admitted that no harm, recently, this year, admitted that no harm had come to anyone and that there was a serious and rigorous redaction process at WikiLeaks. But I think there's the perception that's something to do with that. And I think there's the perception that it's to do with the Swedish investigation. And there's a perception that there were charges in Sweden. There were never any charges. There was never enough evidence to progress that beyond the preliminary investigation stage. There's the perception that women accused him of rape. Neither woman ever accused him of rape. That was the one woman said the police made up the charges in text messages that were never contested. So there's a lot that isn't known. Niels Meltzer, the UN Rapporteur on Torture, documented 50 due process violations and violations of the law in the Swedish investigation. And so people aren't aware of that. They aren't aware that he's being held in jail now with no custodial sentence in the UK, no charge in the UK, purely for extradition purposes, and in a high security prison that's primarily used for terrorism offences and murder. And high security court, which is absolutely unnecessary. Even if he was to be in prison, there's no reason he should be in a maximum security prison. There's no history of violence.
Any further questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, councillors, we move to NM20.